Samantha Miller thought she had the perfect life until the day she discovered her husband, Jonathan, was having an affair with her best friend, Rachel. What started as a painful betrayal quickly spiraled into a shocking series of events that would forever change everything Samantha knew about love, trust, and friendship. As secrets unraveled and lies came to light, Samantha was forced to confront a reality more twisted than she could have ever imagined. This is the true story of how one woman's world came crashing down, and the dark journey she had to take to rebuild her life. On the surface, the Miller family appeared to be the epitome of suburban perfection. They lived in a charming, two-story home nestled in a quiet, tree-lined street. Samantha Miller, the devoted wife and mother, was the heart of the household. She ran the home with grace, balancing the demands of raising two children, a young boy and a girl, while ensuring that everything was in order. Jonathan Miller, her husband, was a successful corporate lawyer with a high-paying job at a prestigious firm. He was often seen as the ideal husband, charming, hard-working, and deeply committed to his family. Together they painted the perfect picture of a happy, middle-class family that many envied. Samantha had always been the social glue in their circle of friends. Her warmth and generosity made her the type of person people gravitated toward. She was the friend who always remembered birthdays, who would drop by with homemade meals when someone was sick, and who made sure her kids had play dates with the neighbors. Jonathan, on the other hand, was more reserved. He spent long hours in the office, always working toward the next big promotion, the next deal. It wasn't that he was distant or neglectful. He loved his family deeply, and his work was simply a means of providing for them. But as the years passed, his long hours at the office began to take a toll on the relationship. Their marriage had once been full of passion and excitement, but now it was marked by an uncomfortable distance. Samantha had noticed the subtle changes in Jonathan. He seemed preoccupied, always lost in thought, and his affection toward her had diminished. At first, she chalked it up to the pressures of his demanding job. She tried to be understanding, to give him space, hoping that things would get better once the busy period at work subsided. But the distance between them only grew. There were no grand gestures or late-night talks anymore. Jonathan came home tired, ate dinner, and went to bed early, barely saying a word to Samantha. She couldn't help but feel the walls closing in. Samantha, always trusting and optimistic, had no reason to suspect that her marriage was in jeopardy. She had never considered the possibility of infidelity. But unbeknownst to her, Jonathan had already begun a secret affair that would unravel everything. The affair began slowly. It was a seemingly innocent connection, one that started years ago when Rachel, Samantha's childhood best friend, moved back into town. Rachel had been a part of their lives for as long as Samantha could remember. She was more than just a friend, she was family. When Rachel returned to town, she and Samantha quickly rekindled their close bond, spending weekends together, sharing stories, and reminiscing about their childhood. Jonathan, always polite and kind, welcomed her into their home with open arms. What Samantha didn't know was that Rachel's presence in their lives was anything but innocent. Rachel had always been the wild card, the one who lived life on her own terms. She had a charm about her that drew people in, and it didn't take long for Jonathan to notice. The two of them began to spend more time together. At first, it was harmless, casual conversations, long walks, the occasional drink after Samantha had gone to bed. But as time passed, their bond grew deeper, and what began as friendship soon turned into something much darker. The chemistry between Jonathan and Rachel was undeniable, and one night it crossed a line that couldn't be undone. Jonathan was drawn to Rachel in a way that he had never been drawn to Samantha. The familiarity of their friendship, mixed with the excitement of something new and forbidden, created a dangerous mix. They kept the affair a secret, knowing that if Samantha ever found out, it would destroy everything. But as the months went on, it became harder to hide. Every stolen kiss, every late-night rendezvous felt like a risk, and yet neither of them could stop. Samantha, for her part, remained blissfully unaware. She had no reason to question Rachel's intentions or Jonathan's behavior. She trusted both of them implicitly, thinking their bond was unbreakable. But slowly their secret was becoming harder to keep. What had started as a small, harmless spark between Jonathan and Rachel was now a full-blown affair, one that would change everything forever. The affair between Jonathan and Rachel had begun to change the dynamics of the Miller family in subtle yet undeniable ways. At first, it was small things that Samantha couldn't quite put her finger on. Jonathan's absence from family events started to become more frequent. He claimed it was due to work commitments or late-night meetings that kept him tied up at the office. Samantha tried to understand, but each time he returned home, he seemed more distracted, more distant. His warm smiles and affectionate gestures had been replaced with tired sighs and a deep weariness that nothing seemed to cure. Samantha started to feel like a stranger in her own marriage. She no longer recognized the man who had once whispered sweet nothings to her in the quiet moments of their life. He no longer seemed interested in spending time with her, let alone rekindling their romance. Their conversations had become mechanical, revolving around the kids and household matters, rather than the intimate exchanges that once filled their home with warmth. Samantha tried to reassure herself that this was just a rough patch, that their marriage would bounce back, as it always had. But a nagging feeling of doubt began to grow inside her. Rachel, too, had changed. She wasn't the carefree, fun-loving friend she had always been. The woman who had once shared secrets and laughter with Samantha now seemed aloof, distant, and occasionally odd in her interactions. When Samantha would ask Rachel about her life, her answers were vague and evasive. Rachel no longer sought out Samantha's company as much. It wasn't that they weren't friends anymore, but the easy, comfortable closeness they once shared seemed to have been replaced with an uncomfortable tension. There was something about Rachel's behavior that unnerved Samantha, but she couldn't quite place it. Samantha began to pick up on other, more alarming signs, small but telling details that kept adding up in her mind. She noticed that Jonathan's phone was always locked, and if she ever asked to borrow it for a moment, he would hesitate, claiming it was charging, or that he had a private message he didn't want disturbed. At first, she thought nothing of it. But as days went by, the secrecy surrounding his phone seemed more and more deliberate. When they were together, he would quickly lock it or put it down face down on the table, as if hiding something. It was when Samantha stumbled across a text message on Jonathan's phone that the world she had known began to unravel. She had been doing some late-night cleaning, tidying up in the living room when Jonathan left his phone unattended on the coffee table. Her curiosity got the best of her, and she glanced down at the screen. At first, the messages were casual, a few work-related texts, but then one from Rachel popped up, just as Samantha was about to pick up the phone and put it back where it belonged. The message was innocent enough at first glance, but something about it caught her attention. It was a message sent at an odd hour, late at night, asking Jonathan to meet her at a hotel in town. Samantha felt the blood drain from her face. The message was followed by another one, a playful remark about how she couldn't wait to see him. Samantha's heart pounded as she read the messages over and over again. Her mind screamed in disbelief, unable to accept what her eyes were telling her. She tried to rationalize it, but the doubt that had been lurking in the back of her mind suddenly exploded into a full-blown certainty. She knew, without a doubt, that Jonathan and Rachel were having an affair. The revelation hit Samantha like a physical blow. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her, leaving her disoriented and unsure of what to do next. Her immediate instinct was to confront Jonathan, to demand the truth from him. But a strange numbness had settled in her chest. How could she possibly face him knowing what she now knew? Her best friend, the one person she had trusted above all others, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. But Rachel was not the only one to blame. Jonathan, the man she had built her life with, the father of her children, had been living a double life right under her nose. Samantha spent the next few days in a haze of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. She couldn't look at Jonathan without seeing the lies in his eyes, without hearing the words he had yet to speak. She had so many questions, but none of them seemed to matter anymore. The truth had been revealed, and the pain was unbearable. What was even worse was the realization that she had been blind to the warning signs for so long. Rachel, once a trusted friend, had been playing a game of deception from the very beginning. The tension in the house grew as Jonathan continued to come and go without explanation. Samantha found herself retreating into herself, her heart heavy with the weight of the betrayal. She began questioning everything: her marriage, her friendships, her ability to truly know the people closest to her. But there was no turning back now. The affair had shattered the illusion of their perfect life, and Samantha knew she would have to confront Jonathan. She just didn't know how or when. And as she stood at the edge of a world that had once seemed so secure, she realized that nothing would ever be the same again. The days following Samantha's discovery were a blur of raw emotion. She couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything other than the overwhelming flood of betrayal crashing over her. It was as though the world had gone silent, and all she could hear was the beating of her own heart, thumping wildly in her chest. Every time she looked at Jonathan, the man she had once trusted with her life, she felt a wave of nausea. How could he do this to her? And how could Rachel, her best friend, the woman she had considered a sister, become part of the betrayal? Samantha knew she had to confront Jonathan. She couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. But part of her hesitated, unsure of how to approach him. What was she supposed to say? How could she even begin to express the hurt, the anger, the sense of being completely deceived? The more she thought about it, the more she realized there was no way to prepare for this moment. The truth was out, and now she had to face it. It was a Saturday morning when she finally made up her mind. Jonathan had left for work, as usual, but Samantha knew he wasn't in his office. He hadn't been for days. Instead, he had been sneaking around, making excuses, and covering his tracks. She had seen the way he had avoided looking at her, the way his eyes darted away whenever she asked where he had been. She had seen the guilt in his expression, but it wasn't enough for him to come clean. Samantha's thoughts were racing. She picked up her phone and sent Rachel a simple, chilling message. "We need to talk." The words seemed so ordinary, but they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. Rachel had not responded immediately, but Samantha knew that this conversation was inevitable. They had both been living in a fragile bubble of denial, but now it was about to burst. That afternoon, Rachel showed up at the house. Samantha didn't know what she expected: tears, apologies, excuses, but what she saw in Rachel's eyes was nothing more than a cold resolve. There was no regret, no remorse in her face, only the uncomfortable understanding that the truth could no longer be avoided. Rachel entered the living room slowly, her eyes scanning the space before they settled on Samantha. Samantha stood, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She didn't need to say much. Rachel knew. She could see it in the way Samantha was looking at her. It was a look of deep hurt and betrayal, a look that spoke volumes without a single word being exchanged. Why? Samantha's voice broke the silence, fragile and raw. The question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Why did you do this to me? To us? Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was visibly shaken, the reality of what had happened finally sinking in. After a long pause, she muttered, "I never meant for it to go this far." The words were weak, lacking conviction. It was as though she were trying to justify her actions, but the attempt felt hollow. Samantha's mind was reeling. Her best friend, her confidante, the woman she had laughed with, cried with, shared every detail of her life with, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. But Rachel wasn't the only one who had failed her. Jonathan, the man she had loved, had made a choice. He had chosen Rachel, chosen secrecy over the trust they had built over the years. Samantha stood up straighter, trying to gather her composure. "I trusted you both," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I trusted you with my life, my marriage. And you both," she paused, swallowing the bitter lump in her throat. "You both turned your backs on me." Rachel's eyes welled with tears, but she didn't speak. The silence between them was deafening. Samantha could feel the weight of the years of friendship, of memories coming crashing down. How could this have happened? How had it all gone so wrong? The conversation lasted for what felt like an eternity, but in the end, Rachel apologized, sort of. It wasn't a heartfelt apology, more of an attempt to absolve herself, to ease the guilt that had been gnawing at her. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. But Samantha could hear the faint trace of self-pity in her words. It was as though Rachel was more concerned about the consequences of her actions than the pain she had caused. In the end, Samantha knew there was no point in continuing the conversation. The trust between them had been shattered beyond repair. There was no coming back from this. Rachel had crossed a line, and Samantha could no longer see her as the woman she had once called a best friend. As Rachel left the house, Samantha felt a strange emptiness wash over her. It wasn't the relief she had expected. Instead, it was a hollow, aching feeling, as though the people she had trusted most had been nothing more than strangers. The betrayal hurt, but it also awakened something in Samantha, a resolve, a determination to move on, to take control of her life, even if it meant doing so without Jonathan or Rachel by her side. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and grief. Samantha knew that this was only the beginning. Jonathan still had to be confronted, and the secrets between them would have to be brought to light. But for now, she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken heart and navigate the painful path that lay ahead. The truth had come out, but the journey of healing was just beginning. The day after Samantha confronted Rachel was one of the darkest she had ever faced. The house, once filled with the laughter of children and the warmth of shared moments, now felt empty and suffocating. Every corner seemed to hold a memory of better times before the betrayal, before the affair had wormed its way into the heart of her family. Samantha had always prided herself on her strength, but now she felt hollow, as if the foundation of her life had cracked and she was standing in the rubble. Jonathan hadn't returned home yet, and Samantha found herself pacing the house, consumed by a storm of emotions. She felt anger raw and unfiltered toward both him and Rachel. She felt hurt, deeper than she had ever imagined possible, and a sense of disbelief that her life had taken such a dramatic turn. How could he have betrayed her like this? How could he have destroyed everything they had built? But above all, she felt a crushing fear. What would happen now? What was next for her children, for the life they had all shared? Her mind raced through the possibilities, but no answer seemed to provide comfort. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't keep living like this. She couldn't stay in a marriage where the trust was irrevocably broken, where the man she had loved for years had been lying to her. But she wasn't ready to make decisions yet. She needed answers, and she needed them now. When Jonathan finally came home later that evening, he walked through the door as though nothing was wrong, his tired face lighting up when he saw her. But the moment he stepped inside, the air between them thickened. Samantha's eyes locked onto his, her gaze cold, unwavering, demanding an explanation. He faltered in his step, something flickering across his face, perhaps guilt, perhaps shame, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He didn't know where to start. "Where were you?" Samantha asked, her voice flat. "I know you weren't at the office, Jonathan." He hesitated, glancing away, before letting out a long breath. "I had some things to take care of." You know how it is. His attempt to deflect only deepened the chasm between them. Samantha knew better. She knew exactly where he had been. She had seen the texts. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her voice rising. "I know about you and Rachel. I know everything." The words hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating fog. Jonathan's face drained of color, and for a moment he seemed utterly defeated. His eyes met hers, but there was no apology in them, only the weight of someone caught in a web of their own lies. I'm sorry, Sam. I never meant for this to happen," Jonathan said, his voice tinged with panic. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." Complicated? Samantha's laughter was bitter, sharp. "You're telling me this is complicated? You've been seeing my best friend behind my back, and you think that's complicated?" The betrayal felt like a physical blow. She had spent years trusting him, building a life together, and now it all felt like a lie. Jonathan stepped toward her, his hands outstretched in a gesture that was supposed to be comforting, but it only made her recoil. "Please, Samantha. I know I've made a terrible mistake. I'm so sorry. I love you, and this thing with Rachel, it was nothing. It didn't mean anything." The words were hollow, a feeble attempt to downplay the magnitude of what had happened. Samantha couldn't hold back the tears any longer, though they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage, frustration, and disbelief. "You loved me. You don't even know what that means anymore. You don't love anyone but yourself." Jonathan's shoulders slumped, and for a brief moment he looked as if he might collapse under the weight of his own guilt. "I was stupid. I don't know why it happened. It was a mistake, Sam." "A mistake?" Samantha shook her head, the disgust in her voice unmistakable. "This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is forgetting to pick up groceries, Jonathan. This was a betrayal. A choice you made over and over again. You and Rachel, you made that choice together." His face twisted in pain, but Samantha wasn't done. The floodgates had opened, and the words poured out, unfiltered. "You think I can just forgive you? That I can just pretend nothing happened? My whole life has been a lie, Jonathan, and I will never be able to look at you the same way again." He tried to reach for her again, but she pulled away, the physical distance mirroring the emotional one that had already formed between them. "You don't get it," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You've destroyed everything. Not just our marriage, but the friendship I had with Rachel. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again. You've ruined everything." Jonathan stood frozen, his face a mixture of regret and helplessness. But it was too late for apologies. The damage had been done, and Samantha knew there was no coming back from it. She had trusted both of them with her heart, and they had betrayed her in the most painful way possible. That night, as Jonathan slept on the couch and Samantha lay in their bed, she stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything crashing down on her. She couldn't change what had happened, couldn't undo the lies and the broken trust. But one thing became clear to her in the silence of the night: she couldn't stay in a marriage built on such deception. There had to be more to her life than this. It was time to take control, to reclaim her own future, even if it meant facing the difficult decisions ahead. The following weeks after the confrontation were a blur of harsh realizations and difficult decisions. Samantha had made up her mind there was no going back. Jonathan's betrayal was one thing, but the fact that Rachel, the woman she had trusted more than anyone, had become an active participant in the destruction of her life was something Samantha couldn't ignore. She had known both of them for years, and yet now their faces were unfamiliar to her. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that had built up to that moment, all the lies, all the small compromises made along the way. The trust was gone, and with it, any chance of salvaging the family life she had once cherished. The children sensed the change, though they didn't fully understand it. The house felt colder, more distant, and the laughter that used to echo through its walls had turned into silence. Samantha tried her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for them, but it was difficult. How could she pretend everything was fine when her entire world had been turned upside down? The pain she felt each day was something she didn't want them to witness, but it was impossible to hide. As for Jonathan, he seemed lost. He had tried, at first, to apologize, to beg her for forgiveness, but every attempt felt more desperate, more pathetic than the last. Samantha didn't want to hear it anymore. She had heard enough. He spoke of counseling, of second chances, but she could see it in his eyes, the same look of regret, yes, but also a sense of helplessness. He knew that things had changed, that no amount of pleading would bring back what they once had. Samantha had no desire to try to rebuild with him. She no longer saw the man she had married, she saw only a stranger who had betrayed her, and a part of her knew that no matter what he said or did, things would never be the same. The decision to separate wasn't an easy one, but it was one that had to be made. Samantha filed for divorce, but she didn't do it out of spite. She did it because she needed to take control of her own life again, to stop being a passive participant in a marriage that had become a lie. She had spent years living for others, trying to please everyone around her, and now it was time to think about herself. It wasn't about revenge, it was about healing, about finding herself again. In the midst of it all, Rachel had tried to reach out. Samantha had received a few calls and messages, but she had refused to respond. There was nothing left to say to her. The years of friendship, the shared memories, the inside jokes, they meant nothing now. Samantha had loved Rachel like a sister, but that love had been shattered by her betrayal. No apology could fix the damage that had been done. No explanation could make it okay. Rachel's calls became less frequent as time passed, but Samantha couldn't find it in herself to care anymore. She had been hurt too deeply, and the scars were something Rachel would never be able to heal. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, Samantha felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The sadness was obvious. The end of a marriage was never easy, and the dreams she had once held for her family were slipping through her fingers. But the relief was just as powerful. She no longer had to live in the shadow of deceit, no longer had to wonder if every word Jonathan spoke was true. The truth had come to light, and now it was time for her to move forward. The children, though young, seemed to sense the change as well. Samantha made sure to reassure them, to tell them that everything would be okay, that they were still a family, even if things were different. She worked hard to maintain a stable routine for them, to make sure they knew they were loved and safe. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the life she had imagined for them, and that realization hurt more than anything. Months passed and the pain didn't fade. There were still moments when Samantha would find herself thinking about what could have been, about the life she had lost. But gradually she began to heal. She started to rediscover parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of her marriage, her role as a mother, and the demands of everyday life. She reconnected with old friends, pursued hobbies she had once loved, and focused on rebuilding her sense of self-worth. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Jonathan, too, had begun to move on. The divorce had been final, and he was no longer a part of her life, but Samantha had come to accept that. He had apologized, but she had no interest in his apologies anymore. He was no longer the man she had married, and she was no longer the woman who had loved him. They had both changed, and the end of their relationship had marked the end of an era in Samantha's life. But perhaps the most surprising part of this journey was the strength Samantha found within herself. In the wake of all the pain, all the heartbreak, she had learned to trust herself again. She realized that while the world could sometimes be cruel, it also had a way of forcing you to grow, to become someone stronger than you ever thought possible. And though her future was uncertain, she no longer feared it. She had survived the worst, and in doing so, she had discovered a resilience she never knew she had. For the first time in a long while, Samantha looked toward the future with hope. She knew that her story wasn't over yet, it was just beginning.